decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow.
The culture starts to play a very big role. As I said before, we live in a place wherein people have had their culture with regard to false practices. There were very bad, evil practices that were happening in many of the cultures all around the world, not just our land, but all around the world there were evil practices. But what brought that light into that? Now you go to any tribal places, you go to places, like islands where tribals live. You go and search in those kind of places, there are definitely evil practices. Recently I went to one of the places, I want to leave that place very unnamed, and I was talking to one of the guide over there, and the guide who took a tour of the place where I went. I definitely want to leave that place unnamed. But in that place, when he was telling me about the history in the 16th century, when one of the king over there, we were visiting a palace there. One of the king over there, he was kind of lost in the jungle during a war or something, that he ran away, and he was telling me that it came to a point wherein this king prayed to one of the goddesses. And the goddesses said, okay, you got to go, and he took a vow saying that he's gonna give some kind of human sacrifice. And he believed that the goddess saved him, and from that day on, I don't know how often, but it was, I guess it was 1 week or 1 month's time, there was a human sacrifice that was made. And they showed me the altar where the human sacrifice was made. And these were the kind of practices that was going on. And it was in the later stages of the 16th century when it was kind of abandoned. And there are different stories that are coming by with regard to all these things, and just not stories. It is true facts that's been happening within our land, within the different lands around the world. We got to pray. That's where, as we read from verse in Romans chapter 1, verse 25 onwards and 26, it says that their minds were darkened. Their minds were darkened. Their minds were darkened, and they were confused. They were in utter confusion. Now that's the stage when you don't know the truth. Now we were definitely discussing about the truth, as to what is the truth and who is the truth, and our topic very much is as to why do we need God. Now these are the stages that are leading us into a point of realization as to why we need God. And when we don't realize this fact that if we don't have God, now it has got to come to a conclusion, it has got to come to an understanding that we need God desperately, because there is a purpose with which you and I are created. The purpose is defeated if we don't realize as to why a certain thing was made. God created everything, and everything has its own purpose. Every living being has its own purpose. Not just living, non-living, everything that God created has its own purpose. Now just imagine, to just explain it out to you, you take an example. Just imagine, I have a mixer grinder in my house, and we call it mixie, and we have a mixer grinder in our house, and we put all these coconut or vegetables or whatever, it just grinds and gives it. You might get a puree or a chutney out of that grinder. Now if on another day when I don't know something called as washing machine, somebody comes home and just gifts me a washing machine, and I don't know what it is, and that just comes as an order, and it's just dropped in my house, and I see that it is rotating the same way just as a mixer grinder, and if I don't know, it just looks pretty much similar, same kind of a cylinder, something pretty much similar, wherein it can grind, and I start to put some vegetables, or I start to put some coconuts in there, it will not give me out chutney. So what ideally you got to do is that you got to think through, and you got to understand as to why washing machine was created. Now where will you find the answer? You got to go and ask the creator, the one who made this washing machine, and you just ask him, why did you make this machine when we already have a mixer grinder? And he'll say, this is not a mixer grinder, this is a washing machine where you're going to wash clothes. Now you also have something called as an owner's manual, and you read that owner's manual, that will tell what you got to do with, what is the purpose of manufacturing something called as a washing machine. And that is the owner's manual. This is the owner's manual for us. For every human being, this is the owner's manual. That tells us as to where we stand, where we got to be, how we got to live our lives. How is it that God created human beings? I just want to go a little off the topic here. When God created humans, now you read from Genesis chapter 1 onwards, chapter 2 especially when we come in, you see that God created humans in His own image. Now mankind, Adam and Eve, when He created Adam, God created Adam in His own image. Mankind He created in His own. What is this God's image? Now God's image is not a certain figure that you see. That's not God's image. God's image clearly talks about God's character. Now we see in Genesis chapter 2, we see that in the evening times, especially in Genesis chapter 3, when the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, sinned, you see that in the evening, it was as a daily practice, God used to come down to the Garden of Eden and take a walk with Adam and Eve. They used to talk to each other and they used to see each other. Now what was the reason? How could they see each other? Now when you try and compare this, you understand when God created mankind, God created in His own image, just like God was. Just like God was. With regard to the holiness, with regard to the love, with regard to the character, everything was just like God. The Bible is very explicit on saying, unless for holiness we cannot see God. Now what is the criteria with which you can see God? The criteria is holiness. We got to be holy. You and I got to be holy to get to the point where we can see God. And that's the reason when Moses was kind of stressing upon God, saying, I want to meet you, I want to see you. God said that you would die the moment you see. So you can see a shadow of mine. I'll just pass by and you just come over the mountain and you'll just see the shadow of mine passing away from there. Now, that was this initial stages when humankind was made. God made us in His own image. No other creation, as I said before, no other creation is ever made in the image of God. Now when we were created in that image, what came in was sin. We sinned. Humans sinned. Adam and Eve committed a sin. And they fell from the glory of God. And they started to feel ashamed. They started to feel that they are naked. They started to feel that they are naked. When we head back, when we turn to Genesis, Genesis chapter 2, chapter 3 when we come, this is clearly written there. There is this play of word, many a times when we are deceived. Please don't think that it is a person who is always trying to get deceived or he's trying to do. There is definitely a force that plays big time. There is definitely a force that plays behind all these. I usually say this to our church. When you read from Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, it says that the man and his wife were both naked and felt no shame. There is this term called as arum and arom. Now, when they were naked, arum, and arom basically means that they, when you read from chapter 3 verse 1, the very next verse, it says, the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. Now, shrewdness, arom, there is a word play that takes place, arum and arom. Now, when they were naked, they never felt shame, is what verse 25 said. But the serpent, who is crafty, who is shrewd, he came and made sure that he is trying to portray to them that you are not yet like God. Not yet like God with regard to understanding. Now God definitely made, there was a tree in the middle of the garden that said the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you are not supposed to eat from there. Now the reason that he said, no, I asked this question, what would, there was once a young lady who came to me and said this, Pastor, please pray for my child. He takes, I'm like, he's not able to understand things, and he runs, he holds the tail of the dogs that are on the street, and he doesn't know things when there are snakes coming. He will not know. He's just gonna go and hold. And the reason that the child is doing that is because he doesn't know what is good and evil. He doesn't know that the dog will bite. He doesn't know the snake might sting. He doesn't know any of those things. When I was thinking through, isn't it good? I was listening to one of the other pastors. He was also saying the same thing, Pastor Chase Joseph, and he was saying this thing, saying that it is a common thing. I mean, it is good to have the knowledge of good and evil. Now that I know what is good and what is evil, I would not go and hold a snake. I would not just go and try to pull a snake or try to pull a dog's tail, because I know that it will bite. Now, children do that because they don't know what is right and what is wrong. Now, what has to happen? Why is it necessary for us to not have that knowledge of good and evil? Isn't it good to have the knowledge of good and evil? Now, when we read through, it is clearly said that God wanted to come there and tell us what is good and what is not. He wanted to be our parent. When God created us, He created us with this whole aspect wherein He's telling us, don't do this, don't do this, do this. He was more like that parent, and He loved that parental figure. That's why we call God as our father. God was standing in that position when He was trying to tell us what is good and what is not. I just had to obey. We definitely had a free will to do what we wanted, but God wanted to tell us. Now, when humans took this, when Adam and Eve got to this point of understanding through Satan, when Satan was standing there and he is saying to the woman, he tried to convince the woman. First question he asked is, did God say you should not eat anything? And immediately the woman answers, no, of course not. Of course not. You can eat anything except for that one fruit, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And immediately that's how he started the conversation. And immediately the next thing he says is that, of course not. You won't die. Verse 4, chapter 3, verse 4. He said, you won't die. The serpent replied, God knows that your eyes will be open as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. Now till that day when they ate from the fruit, God was telling them what is good, God is good and evil. Now that you ate that fruit, you would know, you would become like God, wherein God knows what is good and evil, and you would not need, you are going to replace God with your own understanding, right? You're going to get to a point wherein you're saying, now I know what is good, I know what is evil. Now you just replace God, you just took God outside of the picture, and that's where this whole aspect starts. That verse 6 says, the woman was convinced, and she suddenly started to see that the tree was beautiful. The tree was always there. And they were walking in the garden, they were naming animals, they were doing all those things. The tree was always there in the garden. And until this Satan came, the serpent came and started to market it out to her, she never felt that the tree was beautiful. Yeah? I remember the other day, I went into a supermarket, and as I was buying few things, a statement came into my mind which I read long back in one of the Facebook posts by somebody, and the post read something like this. I don't clearly remember it, but it's something read like this, saying that there is a man who goes into supermarkets and market and buys some product, and he said that I have never seen this product in my entire life. I never knew there is a product like this until I saw the product, and after I saw the product, I felt that I cannot live without this product. That's called marketing. Right? That's how people market out things to you. They market it out, and that's exactly what Satan did here. And this man and Adam and Eve were probably seeing this tree day in and day out. I don't know how many days or how many years passed by, but when they were seeing, they never felt the same way that Satan started to show. Eve, when she started to see this, when Eve started to hear from Satan, she started to hear this thing saying, no, you know what, you're suddenly going to become like God. And when she started to hear that, the woman, verse 6 says, she got convinced, and after that she saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. In just one speech, in just one talk that Satan gave, the woman was convinced. And it also says that the man, Adam, was with her when that took place. That's how it says. Then she take then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. Basically, both of them were there. Both of them were there when that was given to them. Now, what was coming to a conclusion is this, that until that point of time, they could see God. Now, all of a sudden, when we read down from there, I don't want to take much time in there, but when we read down from there, they see that their eyes was open, verse 7, and they suddenly felt shame. In chapter 2, verse 25, they felt no shame. But chapter 3, verse 7, it comes, they felt shame. Suddenly, they felt shame at their nakedness. They started to feel that they are naked. They started to feel that they are naked. Now, many a times when we fall into some kind of a trouble, when we end up sinning, when we start to do something that is against the will of God, there is an automatic conviction that comes to a child of God that what we have done is not right. We start to feel, we want to start to hide ourselves from the presence of God and start to say that, no, why did I do something like this?
Cross before me, the world behind me, the cross before me, the world behind me, the cross before me, no turning back, no turning back. Still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. Though I may wander, I still will follow. Though I may wander, I still will follow. Though I may wander, I still will follow. No turning back, no turning back. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you, Jesus. I will follow you. Will you decide now to follow Jesus? Will you decide now to follow Jesus? Will you decide now to follow Jesus? No turning back, no turning back, no turning